Hello, hola, bonjour, bom dia, konnichiwa, guten tag. Welcome to the Adventure Journal podcast. It seems so innocuous stacking a few rocks along the side of a trail. Maybe you want to remember where you turned, or you just think they look great, or it's fun to stack rocks. But these little rock towers, known as cairns, or sometimes ducks, are exceptionally controversial. Some people to argue to knock them all down, others stridently say don't. Today on the AJ podcast, we're going to look at how a few chunks of geology can make folks see red, what you should do when you come upon one, and even what the National Park Service says about it. I'm Stephen Casimiro. I'm your host, along with Justin Hausman. Justin, hey, hey.
Good morning. Guten Morgen, I should say.
Guten Morgen to you, Herr Hausman.
The only other language I have is German.
Oh, you do have German. Nice.
That's right.
You do. Mm-hmm. Yes. Shouldn't you have French since you spent...
Oh, I sure should. Yeah, but just try learning French in France as an American. It's not the easiest thing in the world. So, yeah.
Talk about adventurous.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So some people are listening. Some people, well, hopefully everybody's listening, but some people are listening and looking on YouTube. For those who are not, what are you wearing?
I got my Cairn Kicker t-shirt, folks, which you could have your own, $25 on the Adventure Journal website, unless we've changed the price and I'm not aware of it.
Cairn Kicker. Tell me about that. Tell me about your experience wearing that shirt out in the wild.
I don't. First of all, I don't really wear shirts with words on them anymore. I just don't like doing it. But this one I love, and I think probably at least 50% of the time I'm out and about, people will ask me about it. Usually it's, what does that even mean? What are you talking about? I will though often get like a thumbs up or like a nod from randos walking around. So there's definitely people that pick up on what it is and what it means. It's always fun to wear it into like an REI or something like that, just to see if I'll elicit more response. But no one's ever really like pushed back on it. The only people that really do are people that don't do a lot of hiking, and they're kind of confused why it would be an issue, which I will just direct them to this podcast so they can learn about it themselves.
Yes, let's talk about this issue. The Cairn Kicker shirt that we made, I want everybody to like AJ. We don't really take stands on things, but a few years ago we ran an opinion piece by a woman who lives in Sedona who had seen cairns and stacks of rocks just exploding everywhere, and she wrote this essay, basically said, "Don't." And what was fascinating to me was the vehement response that generated. And the story also appeared on High Country News, and National Public Radio picked it up, and it became a thing. And people were either very, very adamantly opposed to knocking them down and making more, or they were like, hell yeah, take those things down. And I have been a rabid Cairn Kicker for many years. They drive me nuts. They do have their uses, which we're going to talk about, and then they do have legitimate places, which we are also going to talk about. But what I'm talking about when I'm talking about kicking cairns are the ones that are just kind of monuments to ego, monuments to I was here, I want to mark this spot. Those drive me absolutely crazy.
So I want to ask though real quick. I know where I learned about why I may want to kick a cairn, or why somebody else would. But where did you? What prompted that in you originally?
I would say that the man who radicalized me is Ace Cavalli, photographer who lives in Utah in Canyon country, and I had always felt somewhat ambivalent or maybe ambiguous about what to do when I encountered a cairn. I felt like I might have some bad karma coming my way if I kick one down. Like, what if I kick one down? Somebody gets lost and dies.
It's on you.
It's totally on me. But Ace really articulated a lot of the things that I was feeling about them, which I was seeing them in canyon bottoms, and I was seeing them in places where you had absolutely no need for any kind of direction. You're in a canyon. You can't get lost. Like in these narrow, like why would you put a cairn in a slot canyon? You either go that way or you go that way. And Ace explained to me, and this was, I don't know, probably 15 years ago, but he explained to me how he was seeing them everywhere in canyon country. And I felt that kind of gave me permission to act on them. So
that makes sense. Yeah, you did it to me. I never really thought about it before until our trip to Utah. I suppose you also do a lot more canyon desert hiking than I do, where obviously I would assume there's more cairns than there are places I'm going. I mean, but there, I obviously see cairns, but yeah, you were the one that pushed me on this path, and now it seems somewhat obvious. But yeah, I'm surprised it hadn't really occurred to me before.
Well, it also depends on where you are, but let's sort of take a step back first and look at the history of rock stacking just really quickly, because there's a difference between what's going on now in a social media era and what has happened historically. So the word actually comes from Gaelic. It means a giant heap of stones, so it's pretty self-descriptive. But people have been stacking rocks as long as there have been people. The circumpolar folks, the Inuit and other folks, have long made, they're not so much cairns as they are almost rock sculptures. And they have a very specific taxonomy. They're called a nukshuk, and they can mean all kinds of things, like this is a good place to hunt for seals, or this is a good place to hunt for whales, or go this direction. So there's very much a grammar of what they do with them. And indigenous people all over the world have stacked rocks to memorialize the dead. We've seen them in the West, pre-Columbian times. So people have used them as long as there have been people to help communicate in some way. So the issue is not so much that stacks of rocks exists, it's that they are exploding in this modern era.
So are there I presume there are like active social media campaigns encouraging people to either, well, maybe not kick them, but to not make them, right? Or is it all one way? Is it all just look at this beautiful cairn that I'm doing a yoga pose next to?
I would say the only entity has really been AJ. That's not true. But I think that we've been, even though we haven't made this a mission, it's just sort of the t-shirt is kind of a wink and a nod, right?
Yeah.
But now we're known for it. And I can't tell you how many times we get tagged or DM'd. There's this one video going around of a dog that has been trained to knock over cairns, and it's,
wow.
I can't remember, it's some kind of bully dog. I can't remember what it is, if it's a French bulldog or I don't know what it is.
Face dog. That's funny. And
it leaps at these things and it knocks them down with its whole body, which is just amazing. In fact, just last week somebody tagged me. He was walking along and there was this huge cairn. It was like 4 feet high, and he sort of oops as he went by and knocked them all down. So
see, I actually get, unfortunately, one of the things I get sometimes with this shirt is there's a breed of dog called a Cairn Terrier. And I think it has like a Y. It's basically the same spelling, but with a Y somewhere. And people have actually been like, "Why do you hate dog? Why would you kick a dog?" And I'll have to ask them, I don't know what you're talking about. And they'll explain it. And I go, "Okay, sure, yeah." But
yeah, it's funny. The only place I have ever been in Australia is Cairns. Cairns,
yeah, all right,
which is the entrance, kind of the gateway to the Great Barrier Reef. And so that was one of I didn't think of, before I went there, I don't think I thought of stacks of rocks as cairns. Mm-hmm. In a lot of places, people call them ducks. And
yeah.
I lived in New England for a while and hiked in the White Mountains, and I use those rock stacks regularly for navigation. They do have a purpose. And so as a part of me I'm not going to attempt an Australian accent, but as part of me always wants to sort of hear Cairns said with
I'm not going to do it either.
It's a funny word. So the thing is, looking at historically and looking at their use in trails and navigation, cairns, they have legitimate uses. They do have legitimate uses. And on social, I think what we've seen is where people have embraced the idea as kind of I was here sort of thing, as sort of a geological graffiti. And I did a search actually yesterday, so quite recent, and on Instagram, between rock stacking and stone stacking, there's about 150,000 posts tagged that way. Huh. And then with like stone stacks and rock stacks, it's a couple 100,000. So it's quite prevalent. It's a lot. And I think that most of these that I found, they look like, they don't look like they're directional.
Right.
So
do you think, is there an easy way for you to tell, like right off the bat when you see them? I mean, I feel like you kind of can, depending on where they are, but
I think so. I mean, if they're on a beach,
Right? Yeah,
and
in
you
a
see
city
them,
park. Yeah,
yeah. So in Iceland, there's a beach just west of Wick, I think, and it's where you have these very tall, kind of phallic sea stacks, and it's a black sand beach with all kinds of rocks. You see tons of them there. I would argue that that's relatively harmless. I don't want to come on a
Yeah.
beach and see hundreds of them, but that, as far as
no, that's
stacking
kind of
rock-
cool. I
kinda
see
cool.
that. Yeah, people do that in San Francisco Bay. I think they have, if not competitions, some sort of event where you'll come down and watch people do it. It seems to defy physics. That's fine. I mean, it's obviously a completely different thing, but that's kind of cool, I guess. I've tried. If down by the creek by my house, I'll see how many rocks I can stack, but that's about it.
I think that people don't think,
Right.
basically, is what it comes down to. So the most cairns that I've ever seen on one hike, it was not on the PCT, but it was off the PCT, and I was just going to get on top of a peak, and there was a drainage that was coming north, and it was not even a half a mile, a turn off the PCT up to the top of this little bump, this little mountain. And at the lower, it was impossible to get lost. So it was a drainage. Like there was no,
Right.
you followed the use trail up the drainage. There were no turns off of it in any way. It was chaparral. So which is very spiky. And if you tried to get off that use trail and scramble up one side of the slope or the other, you just couldn't. You would have gotten so scratched up. It was impossible to get lost. And then when the trail finally got out of the drainage and up on the shoulder and then up the top, again, there was a use trail. I knocked over, or I should say relocated 84 cairns in a half a mile.
Holy smokes! I wonder if that was all. Did they all look the same? Like, could you tell? I don't know how you'd be able to tell. Like, it was the same. Like, it was probably one person doing that.
Your guess is as good as
See,
mine.
that's the thing that's one of the things that bums me out about it is that you see something like that, you see one, and I just feel like it gives license to do more. So that could have been. I mean, it sounds like a drainage that wasn't probably very popular, but I'm sure that there are people that sit down for take a little break and maybe they're by a cairn, so they add a couple, and before you know it, there's like a little installation. You're like a little sculpture garden or something like that. I can't imagine one person was just dropping a cairn every 10 feet. But maybe.
You got me.
Yeah.
You got me. I have no idea. It's impossible to sell. I mean, to tell, they were all maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 rocks. And they were stacked on rocks, like a lot of these trails, at least here. I think you live in an area in Marin where it's more wooded, but here, a lot of the geology is exposed, and you'll be walking up this little creek bed, and there will be big boulders. And
Right.
there will be another big boulder. And so people will then take 3 or 4 smaller rocks and they'll put them on top of that one rock. And I just don't in that case, I don't understand it, because I kind of get the idea of stacking a rock and making them look cool. I don't know why you would do that when the trail is obvious and it's impossible to get lost. I don't know if people think that people think they're being helpful.
I think they probably are. That's funny. I've never thought of it as like geological graffiti is a pretty interesting term, because I mean that's effectively what it is. And I don't know that people probably, maybe they don't realize that unless somebody knocks it over or there's a particularly nasty wind event right there. I mean, those are going to be there forever. I mean, it's like the rocks aren't going to move. So it may seem harmless to you, and I mean, I guess it supposedly is harmless technically speaking, but I mean, you're leaving a mark there forever. I mean, unless somebody else comes and does something about it.
Yeah, it's not harmless, which we will get to that later in the show and talk about the kind of damage that it does environmentally. But it's interesting that you mentioned wind, because I read a story. It was a father and a son who were in Acadia in Maine, in Acadia National Park, and they built a couple, and they didn't. I'm not quite sure how they ended up in the story, but the dad said, "We thought the wind would knock it over. We didn't think it was a big deal. We just thought the wind would knock it over." And in this case that I'm talking about, where there were 84, it just doesn't get that windy there, and rocks are
Right.
heavy. So,
That's a weird thing to think, but okay. Yeah.
Well, you thought it.
It's true. But I mean, you'd have to be like a tornado or something. Like it's not really a windy. I mean, maybe it could happen, but
right. Yeah. Well, Acadia is a really interesting place for cairns. So they historically they've used a lot of cairns, and I know you haven't spent a lot of time in the east, and for those who haven't, a lot of the east is above tree line. It's far north. It's quite windy. And so you get kind of above the alpine or the alpine and rock stacks. And it can be very, very, very foggy and cloudy up there. And rock stacks have saved people's bacons many times, especially in a pre-GPS era. And in Acadia, in the early 1900s, there was a trail builder, and this was long before it was a national park. There was a trail builder who was trying to help people navigate, and his last name was Bates. And he created a style of cairn that was actually has it has its own grammar. It basically it's 2 or 3 rocks parallel to one another with a gap in the middle, and then a flat rock like a lintel across the 2 of them, and then more rocks on top. And the idea behind the Bates cairn was that this gap in the bottom and the way that the stone on top was oriented, it directed you along the trail. So like the trail is this way. So it was oriented, that lintel would have been perpendicular to the trail itself. So like, okay, if you come across it, like, okay, the trail is this way. And I'm imagining a lot fewer people hiking for pleasure. And so the trails were probably not as packed down, and it would have been really useful. So Acadia, now these Bates cairns are actually considered historical artifacts. Huh. But other people have seen them, and they either knock them down because they think they're unauthorized, or they build up their own that are not Bates cairns.
Right, and you wouldn't be able to tell. Yeah.
Right. So it's a big deal in the park. And in 2016 and 2017, they got a bunch of volunteers. Like the amount of time that Acadia has had to devote to dealing with cairns is absurd. So in 2016 and 2017 alone, volunteers destroyed 3,500 cairns on 2 mountains, on just 2 mountains.
I mean, that's so many that I feel like you couldn't help but see them, right? Like if you're on a hike, they're going to be kind of a constant companion. I mean, that's a ton.
Yeah. Like if you just decide, they probably weren't arbitrarily half and half, but like if it's 1,750 cairns on each mountain, I mean, that's a shit ton of rocks that people, how many people stacked those rocks?
Interesting.
A lot. Yeah. In June of 2021, Petroglyph National Monument, they found, between the last time they looked in June, 300 newly created rock cairns.
Wow.
And
that's amazing.
It's a lot, right? And they range from like 2 to 3 stones to like stacks that were several feet high.
Have you ever seen signage at a park? Well, presumably Acadia must have them if it's a big deal there. But I don't think I've ever seen signage at a park that was either saying don't build these or here's what, if you see this is what it is. It's surprising how little information there is about something like this, especially since Leave No Trace is such a big part of the language and the messaging in the National Park Service. But I mean, it's possible I've seen it and haven't noticed, but I can't think of an example.
I don't think I have. No. Acadia, they did a fundraising. I think it was a fundraising. They did a T-shirt with the structure of a Bates cairn and sort of what the different things were. It was to raise money. I've never seen a kiosk. There's stuff on the National Park Service and on different national park websites, but I don't know that I've ever looked for it in the field. So I've only seen that super aggro Cairn Kicker T-shirt that you're wearing.
Maybe it's implied by Leave No Trace, I suppose, but somehow I have a feeling that people probably don't think of it that way because it's like a fire ring, which to me is worse than a cairn. To me, I despise seeing fire rings in the backcountry, but I suppose people probably think it's a natural feature or not a feature. It didn't naturally set itself up that way, but it's just a rock, right? How hard, you don't think of it that way, and then all of a sudden there's 3,500 on 2 peaks. That's crazy,
right? Yeah, I've seen people. Yeah, I've seen comments like, what do you have against rocks? Are you worried there aren't enough rocks in the world? I mean, I've seen all kinds of things. People, I don't think that they stop and think about it. And humans are fundamentally self-centered, right? As a kind of individually and as a species. And I don't think that we necessarily stop and think about how other people or the creatures that live there, how it might have an impact on them. And some people don't necessarily care. They don't think about the ethos of maybe somebody else wants to have this feel like a place of solitude.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I hadn't really thought about it when I mentioned it being harmless earlier, but obviously there can be a pretty significant environmental impact there. I mean, even just relocating rocks from one place to another, you're reshaping the landscape eventually if enough people do that.
Right. And we actually are going to tackle that next, but we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. You have probably heard me ask you many times to subscribe to Adventure Journal in print. And if I'm you, I'm thinking, okay, fine, but what's in it for me? Well, here's what's in it for you. We created Adventure Journal on paper and ink, partly because we were exhausted with screens, and partly because we wanted to create this gift to ourselves with amazing stories and amazing photography from some of the best writers and best photographers who are working in the outdoor recreation world. We wanted something that we could sit with quietly, loudly, sitting on our tailgate, sitting in a hammock, sitting by the fire, and just do a deep dive into how people live with adventure in their lives. We guarantee you're going to like it. I'll give you your money back. If you don't, you can subscribe today at adventure-journal.com. We launched Long Weekend Coffee because 1, we love coffee. 2, we love long weekends. 3, we wanted to bring you blends that are not fussy, that will take any kind of brew method wherever you are, in the backcountry, in the front country, at home. Our ethos is work less, play more, drink coffee. When you think about it, long weekends are 50% more weekend. It's a special kind of freedom that's best fueled, of course, by coffee. You can get yours at longweekend.coffee. Welcome back. So far, we have been talking about cairns and their explosion on public lands and how some people just don't like them, like me. But we haven't really dived into whether this is something beyond just aesthetics, whether this actually has an environmental impact. So let's unpack that now. The short version is, yes, they do have an environmental impact. They have a lot of environmental impact. So the first is soil erosion. Justin, do you see cairns up in Northern Cal at all, or in the Sierra? Have you seen much up there?
Yeah, in the I mean, probably like you were saying in the Northeast. I mean, once you're above tree line, yeah, for sure. But I definitely have not encountered something. Usually up in the Sierra, by the time you're high enough above tree line, you're well beyond the range of most day hikers and people that are just out for the afternoon. So you'll see cairns, but then it's usually a bit more appreciated then. It's rarely, a plethora of cairns. So yeah, but only there. Around here in Marin, no, almost never.
Right. Well, they're everywhere in the desert, whether it's out here in the Mojave or in Utah, southern Utah and Canyon Country. And the potential damage in the desert doesn't really seem like it would be much if you don't live in the desert or if you're not a desert geek, because you would think, well, it doesn't rain much, so what's the
right.
big deal?
Yeah.
It's just some dust. But as Craig Childs, who's one of our contributing editors and author, has written in the secret language. Sorry, Craig, secret knowledge of water, secret language of water. His book about water in the desert. When it rains, it really rains, and so you get these massive sculpting events because you get these torrential, whether it's the monsoon or what it is, you'll get these torrential rains. And so you don't have rain for a long, long time. And then when you do, it just comes. And so when you've moved a rock out of place and then you get that kind of flood, it can really have a dramatic effect. So soil erosion is one. The other one is that we don't often think about the habitats of little creatures,
Yeah.
like bugs and reptiles and small mammals. And so again, in a place like the desert, it might be very dry underneath there and you don't see any bugs scrambling. But if you're in a place that is a little bit wetter, or, I'm sure, like, think about the soil in the Sierra or in the Northwest, like you move a rock in the Northwest and like all kinds of critters are going to go running.
See, this is something I actually, that's one of the few things I thought about in terms of the environmental impact before. I mean, I'm just typically annoyed by the presence of people where I don't want it. But so I don't think about the environmental implications that often, except when it comes to things like bugs. As a fly fisherman, I mean, that's the first thing you do when you approach like a freestone creek is you pick up the rocks underwater to see what's living there, to see what might be hatching and what fly you might want to tie on. So even, that's something I've thought about before when, not necessarily with respect to cairns, but just dealing with rocks in general in the backcountry is you just don't, that could be the home for 5 or 6 different bugs. I mean, well, yeah, they're just bugs, but I mean, that's an important part of the landscape, and like, it makes sense to me that they're almost like little hermit crabs, right? Like each little rock could be the home to who knows what's under there.
Right. Right. Well, and that was the last one I was going to get to, was that with freshwater, whether it's along the side of a stream or a river or underneath, you get these macro invertebrates live, and they're like one of the bases of the whole ecosystem. And these things are really small, and there may be bunches of them making their home underneath this rock. And when you move that, you think, well, it's just a hermit crab or whatever it may be. But there may be hundreds or thousands of these things or maybe bacteria, things that are a really important part of the soil that now it's been disruptive. And if you do one rock, well, too bad for you guys. But if you've done 3,500 cairns times 5 rocks, that's a heck of a lot of disruption that's going on in that ecosystem.
Yep, and that's just that's one of those things I just don't think people really. It's just so easy because you're out there, and especially if you don't see anybody else around, right? Like it's just me. It's just these 4 rocks, and I mean, how often are people really going to places where nobody else ever goes? I mean, obviously a lot of us do, but the majority of people out recreating outdoors aren't, off trail, trampling around places where nobody ever goes. So here come the 5 people behind them doing the same thing. Before you know it, you've just completely rearranged the living situation for every single bug in that little area. Makes sense.
Exactly. And some people it is more than just aesthetics or in thinking that they're going to mark the trail. One of the things that's interesting about Sedona, Arizona, is that in this story that we ran, the author pointed out, and she's lived in Sedona for a long, long time, that in 1987, there was this supposed harmonic convergence where lots of spiritual seekers descended on the town. And Sedona is known for being pretty woo. They have something like 200, it's a small town, but they have something like 200 retail establishments selling crystals. And
I have some from there. I've never even been there, and I have some Sedona crystals.
Really?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Where'd those come from?
My wife brought me, Margaret brought me back a little writing crystal once. The guy at the shop said it would help my writing. Ever since, yeah, that's when the Pulitzer started coming. So yeah,
I think I remember that issue.
Yeah, that you do. Hey,
I think I do. So Margaret, girl, thank you. So some people call these medicine rocks or prayer rocks, and there's nothing like somebody who's driven by religion or spirituality. Like you feel like you have your sort of God-given right to do these things. There's a lot of reasons why people do these things, and I think that why people stack rocks and so. One of the things that needs to take place is education. I think that's really a key area here. And I know that Leave No Trace has addressed this, but I don't know if they have made cairn kicking and non-rock stacking a key part of their education. But this seems like a real opportunity to talk about the why of this, right? Like, yeah, okay, we get it. It makes you feel good, or you think it's going to but the linchpin of this ecosystem, you might have just ruined that. So, well,
okay. So, I mean, the natural sort of response to that is, do you just not care if people get lost? I mean, like, people do use these for a reason, and how are we to know whether or not it's actually a functional one versus somebody was just bored?
Right.
and that's tough.
Well, it is, but my take on that is you shouldn't need rocks in a landscape to tell you where
Yeah.
you're going. If you're so there's a couple issues. What if you're in a place in a park? What if you're in a national park where they do use cairns for navigation, and somebody builds one to remind themselves, I turned here, I went off trail here, for example, and then they build another one in the next spot that they can see 50 yards away, and you come upon that spot and maybe it's a little foggy and you see that cairn, the unauthorized cairn, and you see the unauthorized cairn off to the right or the left, and you follow that and you see another one, and then all of a sudden you have no idea where you are.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons I actually never really trust them when I see them, because I have no clue why it's there. I mean, sometimes it's really obvious, like maybe you see the trail off in the distance and you see a cairn between you and that trail and you think, okay, this is obviously showing me like the most direct route to get to that. Okay. But when there's just especially when you're well above tree line and it's nothing but rock, I have no idea why any of that is there. So I tend to I get more freaked out by cairns than I do comforted that it's there to show me the way, which would be another good reason for some education at the trailhead or something. I actually remember the first time I saw cairns. I remember this very well. I had never heard of such a thing, and this was right after the Blair Witch Project came out. So I don't remember what year this was, but whatever, 1999, 2000, somewhere around there. And I was hiking with my girlfriend at the time, and we were up in Plumas National Forest, sort of north of Tahoe, and we were actually outside of a town called Blair's Den, which already we had seen the movie together like 2 days ago, and then we would go on this trip, and we're outside this little town called Blair's Den, and I remember marking that on the map, going, "Oh, geez, that movie scared the crap out of me," and I'm thinking already, I don't love being out here near this town. I wonder what this is about. And we're hiking, and I see my first ever rock cairns. And I right after that movie, which weird little rock shapes and twigs from trees that are fastened together play a pretty big role. I was legitimately freaked out. My girlfriend knew what they were, but I probably haven't trusted them ever since then. And that was like the first time where I thought, I don't like this. This is spooky. This is weird. I don't know what this means. This is some weird bit of witchcraft. So yeah, but a little education would have gone a long way. Had I seen any sign anywhere at the giant trailhead we parked at, I would have known. So
I share that with you. And I think the bigger issue there is you should probably have a better sense of where you're going and what your goals are and how you're going to get in and out than relying on rocks that other people have stacked, which of course means all the basics that we know about, going out in the woods or the desert, which is bring a paper map, bring a compass and know how to use it, use your GPS device if you carry an inReach. If you're walking, and you're doing constant turning, take notes or snap pictures, record it on your watch, record it somewhere else so that you can have multiple ways to remember how to get back. Because if you're relying on what somebody else has put out there, you may just end up being screwed.
And that's what I end up telling people a lot who try to argue with me about it, because I'll hear often my thing isn't necessarily about getting lost. I usually just say, look, I'm in a place where I want as little human intrusion as possible. And so, this sort of geological graffiti, such a good term, is exactly what I'm trying to get away from, right? Like, it's not that different to me than someone's having spray painted on a boulder. Turn here or whatever, like it doesn't seem that different to me. And then often I'll hear, well, what about a trail, right? Like you're already on a trail, but that somehow there is a distinction that needs to be made. And usually it's that, yeah, I'm on a trail and that is a human incursion into nature. But at the same time, my judgment and experience in terms of getting from one place to another, that trail's part of it, but also I'm aware of what's on the map. I'm aware of what's around me. I don't need these other little markers. And if there's a sign at a intersection, at a trail intersection, great. The National Park Service or whoever put that there as they thought it through. Here it is, and that's kind of it. And the rest of it is still up to me. And so that's been sort of the guiding principle of a lot of my thinking about this sort of thing.
Being in the backcountry and having solitude, like it's an illusion that aren't other people around. Like we know people have been in North America for, at least 15,000 and probably 35 or 40,000 years. So they've been here a long time. We are not the first. And I think the trail, as you point out, the trail is there. a lot of places that I go in the Southwest, you don't have to be on a trail. You don't need to stay on a trail. And so that's kind of a different issue. But even so, like, I'm not under any illusions that I'm the first person there. But part of the reason that a lot of us go out there is to have that illusion and to be alone and to not have these signs of technology and of other people. And how long have humanoids, hominins, been around? Is it about 2 million years? I can't remember when Homo sapiens
more
started.
than that, but 2 to 3 million years.
Okay, so 2 to 3 million years. And for most of the 2 to 3 million years, we lived and traveled in small bands, very small bands. And it only changed with the advent of agriculture roughly 10,000 years ago, which enabled us to live in much bigger population centers, villages, towns, and now cities. So, genetically and long-term culturally, like we're not wired to be around a lot of other people.
Right.
And so there is that. I think there's a joy of just being able to be out there by yourself or feel like you're out there by yourself, even if all the critters are looking at you. And even if 10 minutes later, somebody else is going to come down the trail. And as the planet gets more populated and the parks get more traffic, that becomes a rare experience. And so to me, the cairns, these unauthorized cairns, impact that and impede that.
It's almost like I don't know, this might be an egocentric way to look at it, or a myopic way to look at it, but it's almost like someone thumbing their nose at you, like, I've been here first, which I hadn't really thought of until you and I were in Utah, and that was the first time I'd spent a lot of time really in the Southwest, and especially like off trail, right, just kind of clambering around on our own, and it's so much more jarring in that situation because we were hours from anything by car, right? So it's not like you're hopping out of a car near Tahoe and you're on a trailhead and you're saying hi to somebody every 10 feet, right? Like you could easily imagine that no one had ever been where we were. I mean, it would be pretty easy to think that. And then boom, to see cairns in places that you don't need them is, to me, it's a little bit of this sounds harsh, but it's almost a bit of a slap in the face. It's like somebody has to be like, no, I was here. I've been here. And it's just.
Well, if you remember, there was one canyon in particular, and when we came back, we were on the rim, we camped on the rim, and then we dropped down in, and when we came back up, it wasn't so much a drainage. It was a little bit of an alcove, but there was a lot of overgrown. But you could still make your way up, and there were cairns there. Like you didn't need the cairns to figure out.
You
your
obviously
way through.
had to go that way. Yeah.
Right. And the trail was constantly like, maybe it was a little thicker here or a little wider here or a little thicker there. You had to sort of make your way through it, but that's part of adventure, right? That's part of figuring out where you're going to go. One thing that actually, I was thinking about this as I was prepping for the show. So there in canyon country, it's very ledgy, as you saw. And so you'll have maybe a scramble of 10 or 12 or 30 feet up a slope or a ramp, and then you'll get to this ledge. And then if you want to keep going higher, the access to the next ledge above may not be very obvious. It may be 100 yards to your left or to your right. And I can't tell you how, and things look so different coming down. And I don't know if you remember, we probably did this when we were together, but you're looking down and going, did we come right here? Like, that looks really sketchy. Did we really come up this? Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, we did. And so I've started just, when I go up something like that, I'll just put a couple pebbles, like in a line. Just something really, really simple, just to remind myself, just to save a little bit of time coming down so I'm not going back and forth. But there'll be a pebble that's sitting on red rock, and I'll like put two of them in a row. There's something that doesn't look quite natural. And then when I come back down, I'll move them back where they were. I think things like that, especially if you're not pulling them out of the dirt,
right,
that's pretty harmless. So there was this one area where it's the only spot that I know where there are dinosaur tracks in the sandstone and rock art of the dinosaur tracks.
So cool.
It's really cool.
Just proof that humans and dinosaurs lived together and painted together and stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
That's where the Flintstones was filmed, I think, was that area.
certainly was the inspiration for the Flintstones. It could have been. And the way that the dinosaur tracks, they go along the edge of this cliff and then they just disappear. So clearly these were flying dinosaurs. And I'm thinking they were probably saddled. I mean, I'm sure that people were. Hey, the number one book right now in the New York Times fiction list is called Fourth Wing, and it's about riding dragons. And I just read that book, and I have to say I enjoyed the heck out of that book.
I'd ride a dragon. I'll tell you right now. I'd happily ride a dragon.
Well, so where this is relevant is it took me a while to actually find the spot, because it's not like people kind of, I don't want to say it's secret because it's not secret, but it's certainly not like how to get there is not well known. It took me a while to figure out how to get there. And even when I figured out the access, it took me a few trips to figure out like the right way up through these ledges. And when I kind of through process of elimination, figure out like the right way, once I kind of got on that route, there was no use trail. Like it was not really well traveled, but if you looked and you knew where to look, you would see like there's a little rock on another rock 75 feet ahead that probably didn't land there by wind or erosion. And so what people had done was they marked kind of the route, but they marked it in a really subtle and sneaky way. And if you weren't looking for this specific thing, this rock art and these tracks, and you weren't, after like 3 or 4 of these things, you weren't paying attention, then I realized, somebody or some bodies left just a little bit of information, not to guide me, but just sort of to help, if I was paying attention, to help me get through these ledges in a little bit faster way. And I don't know, maybe I'm being hypocritical, but I found it to be really subtle and really useful and helpful. And you could easily, as I found out on the first couple of trips trying to navigate, like you could probably bash your way through without using those little signs. But I appreciated those signs because they weren't neon and billboards saying, dinosaur rides here.
Well, see, I don't know if I've mentioned it already, but I mean, it sort of feels like there is a sort of subjectivity to this, right? Where there are occasions to where they're often useful, but I mean, there are occasions to where this makes sense. I get why this is here. I understand the thought process behind the person who put this here. It's not intrusive. You're right. Like it's a trained eye that recognizes it, right? Like we're used to, you can tell what nature does, right? You spend enough time out there, you know that a rock couldn't possibly be there on its own. And that's all it is. And that's fine. I don't have an issue with something like that. But it does take a lot of practice to be able to recognize that sort of thing.
It feels a little bit like a secret handshake.
Mm-hmm.
It feels a little bit like if you know, and people weren't picking up big flat pieces of red rock and, creating a fire ring or, creating a stack. It was just like, there's a little rock and I'm going to move it over here onto this point. I don't know. Again, I could see where somebody might accuse me of being hypocritical, but I felt like that was a case where, and then if you wanted to return it to nature, you could easily just sweep them aside. But I didn't, because there was no obvious trail to this. Like you had to walk for probably a half a mile before you even found like the slightest sign of this. Like you sort of had to go through the secret door before you then got the secret handshake, if that makes sense.
Well, I'm wondering if, and this could open up a whole other can of worms, but I'm wondering if the practice as it is will kind of start to fade anyway, with so many people having pretty easy to use GPS in their pocket or even on their wrist pretty soon. I mean, it's one thing if it's marking like a 3-foot gap that you need to go down a drainage or something like that, or a ledge that goes in a canyon that GPS isn't that accurate. But generally speaking, I mean, I don't know why. Like it would take me longer to actually erect a small cairn than it would just mark something on my GPS if I'm trying to find my way back to something. So I could see this fading, which makes me think of something though like the Strava heat map, or something where it's like maybe there'll be digital versions of this pretty soon to where you can just sort of look at an area that is maybe off trail entirely and you say, oh, here's where everybody has gone. It's a little different because it's not on the landscape. Well, it's actually a lot different because it's not altering the landscape at all, but it is maybe perhaps encouraging more people to go in different routes or something like that. But that's sort of a different thing. But I could see a world in which cairns aren't really an issue anymore. I mean, as GPS becomes more and more ubiquitous on your devices.
Maybe. I mean, that's optimistic. And maybe with education. One thing that seems pretty clear is that the Earth's population is going to continue to grow, and people are going to need to connect with nature for their mental, physical, emotional health. And so there's going to be more people out there. And so I think it's incumbent on us and imperative on us to think about our broader impact, which I've stopped using Strava for the most part, except on like the local trail networks. If I really want to track it, I just don't really use it anymore because of the heat map. And I use Gaia a lot, but I've stopped doing a lot of my routes on that because I think about maybe like a data breach or something like that, or what the folks there might do with that information. And there's as you know, like I think from some of our running around in Utah, we had some missions. We were looking for things specifically, and those are things that you don't even think about marking on a map. You don't think about recording them GPS. Like if there are fragile things, like say a ruin or a petroglyph, like just go, don't record it. Just go and don't tell anybody about it. Because first, I think that the satisfactions that you get from the problem solving and the joy of discovery when you do find something are way, way higher.
Yeah, for sure.
And secondly, as we've learned, unfortunately, these things are very fragile. While there are a lot of really well-intended people that are trying to find, say, a particular ruin, there will people that don't care and that will then put GPS coordinates and tell people how to get there. There's just always going to be those folks that either don't understand or don't care. And so I think that for lack of a better way of putting it, the more secretive that we are and the less digital that we are about these things, I think the better for everybody, and probably the better for our personal experience.
Totally. I mean, that's the thing that's my main issue really is I completely understand the environmental aspect of it. I totally get the possibility of maybe people overrunning a place, altering the landscape. I get that. That's all terrible. But for me, really, it's that. And I don't know if people, I don't know. I guess this could also be kind of gatekeeping it away too. It's like, this is what I value. It might not be what you value. And I understand that. But I know from personal experience that you are going to have a much better time if you don't know what you're getting into, if you figure it out on your own, you find a place on your own, you navigate the whole way on your own. With a map, with the right things. But I mean, in terms of, it's just that's why you go. That's a richer experience. And so I would like people to think about it. That's to me is how you should think about it. It's just, why would you lessen that?
Not everybody agrees, and I'm terrified to have a discussion about gatekeeping, but maybe we should at some point.
Right? Yeah.
So this brings us to what should you do if you find a cairn. So Yosemite National Park here in California, earlier this year sparked a lot of attention and press in July when it says, knock them down. And they put out a release and it said, I'll read it to you, just so you can hear from the horse's mouth. Should you knock this over? It was a post on Facebook, and it was somebody knocking down a video of somebody knocking down probably like a 4 or 5 foot cairn. It was huge.
Yeah, that's dangerous.
Yeah,
rock
it is
Jenga. Yeah,
exactly. And so the park said, should you knock this over? Yes! Exclamation point. I love the exclamation point. Yes. Why did wilderness restoration rangers dismantle this rock cairn? Spoiler alert: they didn't dismantle it. They knocked it over with glee. Okay, according to Leave No Trace ethics, when we recreate in wilderness spaces, our goal is to leave no signs of our impact on the land and respect other creatures living in it. Unfortunately, this dramatically oversized cairn is a mark of human impact and is distracting in a wilderness setting.
I mean, that's it. That's it.
That's
perfect.
It. Let's give it up for Yosemite. So, however, because there's always a however, Arches and Canyonlands National Parks in Utah said, wait a minute, hold on there, fuckaroo. We have officially sanctioned cairns. And as we know, Acadia does too. And so it's a park by park basis. And so what the National Park Service has decided is that it's up to each park, because each park has a different history, has different pattern of using cairns or not using cairns. And some parks like Acadia, it's an important part of their culture. They're considered historical artifacts at this point. So my take on cairns, and I think everybody's going to have to figure out their own, but my personal take, and I emphasize this is personal, this is not AJ's, but this is what I do. First off, I don't touch anything in a national park. Like national parks to me feel more like museums. If I could levitate like a few inches above the soil and I'm hiking in a national park, I would do that. So I basically don't touch anything. But I don't tend to spend a lot of time in national parks. I spend a lot more time on BLM land and national forests. And I just use my judgment, if I feel like this looks like it's a sanctioned cairn, or if it's critical, I use my brain.
Exactly.
And I would say that the vast majority of cairns I see, I take down. And I don't sometimes I will joyfully kick one just for the fun of it. But then I have to go pick them up where I kicked them and find a place where I need to plant them. So I just dismantle them, and I sometimes I'll get frustrated and I'll just sweep them off another boulder with my hand, but I look to replace them as naturally as I can, and to look as if I haven't really passed. Like if I just knock them over, it's going to look like somebody else was there doing something. And so I think that I owe that to other people who feel the way that I do, to put them to redistribute them in a way that we will never know. We will never know exactly how they were, and that's something that Petroglyph National Monument stressed. So not only do they have to figure out where they go as best they can, but like that takes a lot of time. Like it takes a little bit of extra effort to think, okay, it makes your hike longer to put them back. But I think that we owe it to the rocks, we owe it to the people who follow us to do it as naturally as we can.
Well said. Yeah. We can't all just ride our flying dragons over the landscape, leaving no trace, as much as we'd like to.
I would really like to do that. So, all right. So if you want to buy a Cairn Kicker t-shirt, you can do that on the Adventure Journal website. We would appreciate it, as everybody who has ever done a podcast, who would listen to a podcast, that if you give us a rating, if you give us a review, if you follow, if you like, if you do all that sort of good stuff, it helps us out. We have no idea what the algorithms are doing, but we know that is going to help with the algorithms. If you like how we approach adventure, and if you've listened this far, I know that you like adventure. You should consider subscribing to Adventure Journal in print. We do 4 of them a year. AJ Quarterly has all of our best stories, all of our best photos. Those stories never appear online. It is the analog gift that we are making for ourselves. You can subscribe to that or to our weekly newsletter at adventure-journal.com. Thank you so much for sticking with us all the way to the very end. Take care.
Bye.